Well, happy birthday to me, because today marks the 4-year anniversary of this YouTube channel. It all started with a stupid video of modding Skyrim to show to my friends, and here I am now with nearly 25,000 subscribers and actually several pretty decent videos to my name. Look, I get it, every YouTuber says this, but if you've been in this position before, you know it really is special and kind of crazy to think about the fact that you can make something, put it on the internet, and people will watch it. So, genuinely, I appreciate you guys for whether you've only watched one of my videos, if you only watched part of them, if you watched every single video I've ever put out. I don't care. The fact that you're watching just means the world to me, so thank you for that. That is really cool. Now, as many of you know, I like doing a special video for these anniversaries. In fact, at the 1-year anniversary, I made a list of my top 10 favorite video games of all time. And then the next year I had to make a separate list for Star Wars games, because if I included Star Wars games in the first list, that would be like almost every game. I like Star Wars, what do you want me to say? Now, of course, that was 2022. 3 years is a long time, and I've played many new video games since then. So this year, I thought about remaking that top 10 game list. However, whenever I stopped to really think it over, I realized that a lot of the games on that list would not change too much. There's a reason things become your favorite, and it takes a lot to knock any of those games out of that running. However, I have recently played several video games that have really stuck with me. Games I want to take the time to talk about and that I would consider some of my favorites. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Some of the games I've played over the past 3 years that have really left an impact on me in some way, shape, or form. Maybe they offered something novel, maybe they offered a fantastic experience, or maybe they're just fun, and it's hard to say exactly what it is that made this game stick out to me so much. But I wanted to take the time to talk about a few of these, because some of these games are not the most well known. Now, don't get me wrong, not everything on this list is going to be super obscure. There's some pretty common household names on this list, but I'm willing to bet there's several of these entries you may have never even heard of before. But let's not waste any more time and talk about another top 10 of my favorite video games of all time. Let's go. Now, before we go any further, I do want to say this video is not scripted. A lot of this is just me talking off the cuff. Mainly because I feel like sometimes whenever I script a video and I read it off, it sounds a little too artificial, and I wanted this to feel very genuine, but the drawback is this might be a little rambly at times. But onto the game itself, Evil West is actually a game that breaks a lot of the rules I've set for myself in the past about these top 10 lists. It's a game I actually haven't beaten yet, but I have a reason for it, but we'll circle back to that later. Something that's going to become very obvious as we go forward in this list is I really enjoy vampire media, specifically vampire hunters. I don't know, there's just something about that aesthetic and taking on such a fascinating creature that I just enjoy. And that's exactly what this game is. The game puts you into the shoes of Jesse Rentier, a member of a vampire and monster hunting organization in the Old West. And, that's about all there is to the plot. I'll be honest, if I had one criticism for this game, it was that the kind of ideas and stories are all fairly basic, but at the same time, sometimes you just need a very basic palate cleanser game like this. I know this is something people have said about a few video games recently, including like the new Space Marine, but this doesn't feel like a game that came out in 2022. This feels like the type of game you would have found back on like the PS2 or maybe even the PS3 360 era of video gaming. It's a fairly standard hack and slash beat 'em up, but with this really neat Old West steampunk Van Helsing aesthetic to it. You've got this electricity gauntlet with these sick brass knuckles on it. You can pull out a 6-shooter, a lever-action revolver, a sawed-off shotgun, all while fighting through these different demonic hordes. Through a lot of very interesting environments. Obviously, a lot of them take inspiration from typical old western things you'd see: an abandoned town, an abandoned mine shaft, a train car, a city festival. But there's also some more fantastical level design here or there. Caverns filled with gothic architecture, unsettling nests filled with these massive spider webs and other creatures. Again, I really don't think this game does anything new, but what it does do, it does well. It offers a really solid and fun and flashy gameplay loop, letting you mix fistfights with gunplay, with these kind of weird superpowers that you just have inexplicably. But where this game really shines in my mind is the multiplayer aspect. I feel like there's not enough games nowadays that you can play the campaign co-op, and you can play the campaign co-op online with a friend. And that is how I've been playing Evil West. It's the reason I haven't beaten it yet, because me and my buddy Jevon have been playing through it together. But I gotta say, this game almost feels like it was designed with multiplayer in mind. Or I don't know, maybe the balancing automatically shifts to have multiplayer aspect, because the game offers a lot of challenge, but I feel like it could not do this alone. Normally, for a game on these top 10 lists, I have to have at least beaten it once. But I feel like I can make an exception in this case, since my playing it is dependent upon another person. Still, it may be very simple, it may not offer anything new, but Evil West is just a solid experience, and something I'd highly recommend you check out, especially if you have a friend who shares a love of the classic cheesy B-movie aesthetic. Yeah, I know, right from one piece of vampire media into another. So I've always wanted to play the Castlevania games, and after I finally picked them up about, 2 years ago, I quickly found myself playing through every game in this franchise I could get my hands on, and it has become one of my favorite video game series of all times. And, spoiler alert, much like Metal Gear in the original video, you are going to see several different Castlevania games on this list. The Castlevania games mainly come in one of two different gameplay styles. There's the very open-ended Metroidvanias, and there's the classic 2D games. This is one of the latter. And it's one of the slightly more obscure Castlevania games because it was only ever released on the Sega Genesis. But let's look at the game itself. Bloodlines is set right in the middle of World War I, actually serving as a very loose sequel to Bram Stoker's novel. Your protagonist is John Morris, the son of Quincy Morris, who is a character in the book, and he continues his father's legacy as a vampire hunter, taking up the iconic Belmont whip and setting out with his friend Eric Lacard as they stop Elizabeth Bathory, or Elizabeth Bathory. You'll know who this is if you watch Castlevania Nocturne. The premise is that Elizabeth is actually Dracula's niece and is trying to revive him. So she has orchestrated a worldwide war to try and offer a massive blood sacrifice to bring him back, thus setting the stage for your globe-trotting adventure. I think the biggest aspect of this game that stands out to me has got to be the visuals. First off, every level is set in a different part of the globe. Sure, you start out in the very standard ruins of Dracula's castle, but then you quickly move on to other places like ancient Greece, where you're going over these Corinthian pillars, a war factory in Imperial Germany, and one of my favorite levels, the Palace of Versailles in France, where, I might add, the final boss of the level is none other than the ghost of Marie Antoinette. But that's not all, because halfway through the fight, the ghost of Marie Antoinette turns into a massive killer moth. I still don't know what to make of this fight. But it's not just the gorgeous level design. The game does very interesting things with visuals. I think it's best summed up with this part of the Leaning Tower of Pisa level. You have to climb to the top of the tower, and in order to do so, you hop between these different platforms. As the tower spins and you see platforms you've already crossed in the background, it gives the illusion of climbing up to the peak. You get a feel for the progress you've made spatially. But that's not the only instance of cool visuals. In the final level, as you traverse Bathory's castle, you'll find yourselves in these rooms that have really weird spatial distortions, as if the screen was segmented and shifted around where you can't quite make sense of where you are or how far that platform is away from you. Then of course there's this infamous inverted room, All of these things make the levels stand out in your mind. It's hard to forget any of them because they are so distinct from one another and distinct from everything else in the Castlevania series. You also do get some minor level differences depending on which character you play as. John Morris, while being your typical Belmont, can actually use his whip to swing across gaps like Indiana Jones, an ability that Eric Lacard does not have. However, Eric can use his massive spear to not only kill enemies at a much further range, making him essentially an easier mode to play, but you also get this massive jump, giving you a verticality that the other character doesn't have. That means occasionally you'll come across these diverging paths where one character will go one way and the other will go another. It offers some variety and decent replay value. While all the other 2D Castlevania games are really good and worth playing, I have to say that I think Bloodlines is the pinnacle of this type of Castlevania game design.
War is not economic stimulus. San Francisco is gone now.
That was for the good of all Americans.
Now, while I do love a nice slow-paced video game with a compelling story, I also love high-octane action just as much, and that is exactly what Vanquish is. I remember I had never even heard of this game before, and then one day while scrolling social media, I just found a clip. It should be this clip right here, assuming I managed to track it down. And just from this video alone, I knew I had to find this game and play it. This looks so cool. So I managed to get my hands on it, and boy, I was not disappointed. Which I guess that is what you can expect from Platinum Games. More than likely you're familiar with this publisher in some way, shape, or form. Obviously they partnered with Konami to make Metal Gear Rising, which if you recall was number 2 on my previous top 10 games list. But they're also responsible for things like Bayonetta, as well as Transformers Devastation. Really need to play that sometime too. So of course they bring their signature brand of fast-paced gameplay here. You play as Sam Gideon, who I swear is just some weird reincarnation of Jetstream Sam from MGR. He's a DARPA soldier with an enhanced exoskeleton that lets him do everything you see on screen here. I'm gonna be honest with you, as much as I like stories and video games, and even the more off-the-wall stories that would be in a game like this, I really didn't pay attention to the story. Here's your kind of standard futuristic sci-fi politics thing, but what you're really here for is the gameplay, and it's time to finally talk about that. I feel like this mixes every type of shooter imaginable into one melting pot that somehow creates something. It creates something. It has cover shooter mechanics, but is also much more fast-paced than your typical cover shooter. You have incredible maneuverability options, being able to quickly snap the cover, but also using these jet repulsors to slide your way around the map, giving you really quick flanking options, a lot of controls, and just... I don't know, what else can I say? Just look at the screen. It also weirdly feels like it has bullet hell aspects, having to quickly dodge out of the way as just massive amounts of fire rains down on you. I don't know. As I sit here, I almost struggle to talk about this game because it's something that I feel like you can't adequately describe. It's something that has to be experienced. So, if this gameplay seems interesting to you, I highly encourage you, go check out Vanquish. You're not going to be disappointed. Mecha shows and movies are not really something I've always been a big fan of. I haven't taken the time to watch any Gundam series, I've never watched Pacific Rim. Transformers, which I know is not quite the same, but is at least tangentially connected, is something I've only recently gotten into, and I hope to be dead in the ground before anyone forces me to watch Neon Genesis Evangelion. And yet, despite all of that, Zone of the Enders is a game that whenever I heard about it, I was so intrigued by, I had to pick it up. I won't lie, however, the biggest thing that caught my attention about this game is who made it. None other than Hideo Kojima. Now, I know this might come as a shocker to you, but the guy who included 3 Metal Gear games on his last top 10 list and has a Big Boss profile picture on YouTube is a big fan of Kojima's work. I even love his other games, like Police Knots. And I'm currently in the middle of playing through Death Stranding for the first time. Not gonna lie, if I had a few more hours under my belt with this game, it may have cracked the list as well. But let's get back to Zone of the Enders. It's actually very unlike other Hideo Kojima games, which tend to be based around really long stories and narratives and have really intricate cutscenes, but this one's actually pretty short and sweet and to the point. It feels like you're playing through a mecha anime, which is something I did not realize would be as fun as it was. Now, Zone of the Enders 2 is specifically what's going on this list. However, both games are so short you could basically combine them together into one product. And in both games you are an orbital frame pilot called a runner who take control of a machine known as Jehudi. Now, I think one of the best aspects of this game is absolutely the designs of these mechs. You can definitely see the Metal Gear influence, but with Jehudi specifically, it's so sleek and beautiful to look at, really. And is just as good to control. This is another game that really comes down to being a hack and slash beat 'em up, but it takes advantage of every directional axis. Not only do you move back and forth, you go up and down, you quickly maneuver around to fight these foes that are coming at you. It feels like you're piloting a massive mech with its quick movements, its fast response time, its powerful attacks, and the multiple different gadgets you have at your disposal. The first game kind of sets the stage for this world. It's a pretty standard Gundam type affair with multiple different space colonies and political revolutions and terrorist organizations. And basically you play as this kid who finds the Jehudi mech and ends up using it to defend his home from an attacking group called Bahram. It's a very interesting world, again being set on a space station with these suburban neighborhoods littered about. But I think the second game is really where the series comes into its own. The second runner picks up a few years later, where you play as a new character named Dingo, who really just does look like they combined Solid Snake with Raiden, but I digress. Again, you're piloting Jehudi to fight against Bahram, but the settings are a lot more varied here. A lot of it takes place on Mars, but the environments are much different than what you experience in the first game. There's massive space stations, but there's also canyons you fly through, desert plains to traverse, enemy fortresses littered with defenses, and a really interesting set piece chasing after a train. But again, the movement and the combat is really where this game shines. You move incredibly fast. Sometimes it's really hard to tell what's going on screen, but it sells the illusion of piloting this massive war machine that is sleek and elegant, but also highly deadly. You also gain access to several sub-weapons. In fact, I almost think this game gives you too many. They can be cycled between pretty easily, and each one has its uses. From a simple but powerful super laser, quick-firing conical bolts, and then my personal favorite, the Gauntlet, which basically turns your fist into a shotgun, which blasts enemies back into walls, and if they hit a wall, they take double damage. Speaking of, another aspect of the combat is how you can incorporate certain moves into your combos to throw an enemy straight down or straight up. And again, if they hit a structure, well, they take more damage. And a lot of these environments are destructible, letting you experience firsthand how much devastation one of these mechs can cause. And another aspect of the presentation that I think really needs to be talked about is the cutscenes for this game. Zone of the Enders 1 went with these 3D models which don't really look awful for the time, but they also don't look the best. And mixed with the admittedly very poor English voice acting, it wasn't the most pleasant experience. However, Zone of the Enders 2 goes a completely different direction, having these hand-drawn 2D anime-styled cutscenes. Again, when I say it feels like you're playing through a mecha anime, you are literally playing through a mecha anime. The game also swaps between 2D and 3D in the cutscenes pretty seamlessly. And of course you have the typical Kojima codec, but not really a codec, where a portrait of two characters talk to each other in a box. But of course here it's framed as the intercoms in between the two systems. One last thing about the mechs is that the different orbital frames make for fantastic boss fights. Even in Zone of the Enders 2, you do end up fighting a few of the same frames multiple times, but you fight them in different ways, and it's interesting to see how you can utilize the environment or different skills that you've acquired to take them down. or how the enemy will use some of those skills against you. My only real complaint about this game is that it is incredibly short. You could easily beat this within a 4-hour time span if you know what you're doing. Now, I played this through the Xbox 360 HD collection, which has both games together. Probably the best way to play it because, again, both games can kind of be combined into one singular game. However, I do think some sort of remaster actually came out for this game a few years ago on PS4 and PS5. I don't know all the details about it, I only just found out that this was something that existed, but I'm not gonna lie, there is a little bit of a lack of content, just because it is a very quick game. Still, maybe you want a quicker game, and if that's the case, and if this seems like something interesting to you, even if you're not a big fan of the anime aesthetic, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised with the way that this takes a whole new approach to 3D combat. And we're back on the vampire kick with Bloodstained Curse of the Moon. What's weird is that this is actually a spin-off of an indie game made by the developer of the Castlevania game. Yeah, we're back to Castlevania. So Koji Igarashi was the lead developer on Castlevania games going back as far as Symphony of the Night. But not too long ago, he ended up leaving Konami, and he wanted to continue making games, but of course he couldn't really use the Castlevania licensing, now could he? That's when he decided to create Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, a spiritual successor to the Metroidvania games of old, utilizing a lot of the systems he had developed. But if you know about this game, you know it was one of, if not the most successful Kickstarters of all time, and naturally he had a lot of different Kickstarter goals which ended up coming true. One of those goals was a smaller spin-off game, Curse of the Moon, which is a 2D game designed after the old-school 2D Castlevania games. In fact, it specifically takes inspiration from Castlevania 3. That's the one that got adapted for that first Netflix show. Now, the thing that stood out about Castlevania 3 is that you could actually play as up to 4 different characters. Those being Trevor, Sypha, Alucard, and Grant Dynasty, who sadly didn't make it into the show. The only problem was you could only ever play as 2 of these characters at a time, and one of them had to be Trevor, so you couldn't freely swap between any of them at a time. Well, Bloodstained Curse of the Moon fixes that problem. You start out as a side character in this game, a roaming samurai named Zangatsu, and you end up traversing the land in a kind of loose retelling of the game where you pick up some of the other characters, including the primary protagonist, Miriam, and the game basically ends up playing exactly like Castlevania 3, but now you can freely swap between the 4 characters at any given time, and they all play exactly how you want them to. Miriam is a stand-in for the typical Belmont character, and probably my personal favorite. Zangatsu's kind of just the basic swordsman, but then you also get Gabel, who's the antagonist of the main game, but here serves as the Alucard vampire character, as well as a magician by the name of Alfred, who plays like Sypha. I'm not gonna lie, this is probably going to appeal to a Castlevania fan more than anyone else, but it's still so well designed, having this beautiful pixel aesthetic that harkens back to something like the NES while also having so much more detail than what was possible on that console at the time. This is another one of those that's just, you pick it up, you play it for a bit, you're not going to get some grand narrative out of it, you're just going to get a really solid, refined experience that feels like another 2D Castlevania game. Something that I don't think we've gotten in the past 20 years if I think about it. So if this sounds interesting to you, I think you can usually pick it up on sale for like $5. It's got good visuals, solid gameplay, fantastic boss fights, and a good little dose of nostalgia to go along with it.
Hate can bring us back, give us strength, embrace it.
It is what is in men's hearts that he cares about. He loves you as he loves me. We have only to ask for forgiveness deep within ourselves and be welcomed back.
You monkeys don't deserve redemption. It is my divine right to rule by his side as an equal, or perhaps more than that.
You would rather rule in power and might than to offer forgiveness and love. This is why you are cast out, Unholy One.
What's funny about Castlevania Lords of Shadow is I want to say I played through this game about a month, maybe 2 months after I made my initial list. And I can tell you that if I had played the game, it would have made it to the original top 10 video. Lords of Shadow is interesting for a variety of different reasons. The main one being it has a completely different gameplay system than any other Castlevania game out there. Obviously, the 2D and Metroidvania games are the primary types of Castlevania games, but there is the occasional 3D game every once in a while. However, none of them ever really did well and are not particularly fondly remembered. But of course, 3D games were all the rage, so Konami was dead set on creating a 3D Castlevania game. And in the middle of the 7th generation, they had a team who pulled it off, that being Mercury Steam, with the help of Kojima Productions, but yeah, I feel like everything's eventually going to go back to Kojima somehow. Lords of Shadow is also essentially a reboot of the Castlevania series. The previous games followed at least a loose timeline, but this game throws all of that out the window for a brand new reimagining. It also goes back the farthest in time to give a brand new retelling of the Belmont family history. You play as Gabriel Belmont, who I can best describe as Aragorn if he was in a grunge band. No, but in all seriousness, this game definitely has some of that early 2000s edgy aesthetic to it. It's a lot more bloody and gruesome, it's a lot darker visually than a lot of other Castlevania games. Despite this, the protagonist is a fairly pure-hearted hero, being a generally nice guy bent on justice, while having to traverse a world that is full of evil and darkness trying to drag him down. The aesthetics are very much so based on a medieval Spanish fantasy setting, which makes sense because the developers, Mercury Steam, are based in Spain. And the whole world has this Guillermo del Toro feel to it. But it's a beautiful aesthetic which works in this setting so well. Gameplay-wise, well, I'm gonna level with you, it's basically just a God of War clone, something very popular in this time. But a God of War clone just means that it's a really solid action beat-em-up, utilizing this frankly awesome crucifix chain whip as you create combos to deal with the forces of evil. You also gain access to buff your attacks with either light or dark side power, one which heals you and the other which increases your damage, both of which giving you access to combos unique to their respective sides. But this system is not chained to morality choices, so you can use both of them at your leisure without feeling like, oh, I have to play this way if I want to be a good guy, or oh, I have to play this way if I want to be a bad guy. They're tools at your disposal, not a conscious choice you have to make. You also get some classic Castlevania sub-weapons added to your arsenal, including holy water, daggers, fairies to heal you. All of these which can further be boosted by the light and dark side powers. And God of War is not the only game this pulled inspiration from, because there's also a little bit of Shadow of the Colossus in here. There are several bosses who are these massive golem-like creatures that require you to climb them and destroy weak spots. However, these bosses are few and far enough between where they still feel unique, even if two of them are basically the exact same if I'm not mistaken. But you're also be coming across other bosses, all of which are very fun and engaging to fight, and many of which are callbacks to other Castlevania games. Like I said, despite the fact that this is a reboot, this might be one of the best love letters to the Castlevania series. Mixing together characters and lore from all over the place and reimagining them in different ways. Even some of those lesser known characters like Cornell the Werewolf from Castlevania 64, one of the most panned games in the series. And the final aspect of this game that I think really stands out for me at least is got to be the story. It actually starts off fairly simple. Gabriel is trying to seek justice for the death of his wife. Gabriel also meets another member of his knightly order, the Brotherhood of Light, who tells him about the Lords of Shadow, a demonic force bent on separating humanity's connection with heaven, and also the key to possibly getting his wife back, as in her death she was actually stuck in this limbo world, neither dead nor alive. The setup is engaging enough, but as you progress through the story there are quite a few twists and turns, and you end up with a plot that you don't quite see coming. And even when you think you know what's going to happen, there is some final elements that just end up subverting your expectations. At least for me, that was the case. I felt like I knew exactly where the story was going to go because it felt so much like, oh, they're trying to go for this particular type of story. Almost like everyone in the world was forcing you to go down this path, only for Gabriel's decisions at the end to completely change that. I don't want to go into more detail because just experience it for yourself. Although there is one final twist in this game that I'm not a huge fan of, and I don't think too many other people are as well. I'll leave you to discover that. My only real criticism with this game is it does tend to drag a little bit in the middle. But ultimately it offers a really fun gameplay loop, harkening back to some of the best games of the 7th generation. It's a great take on the formula with a phenomenal story that will probably surprise you more than you think, and with beautiful visuals to top it all off. Castlevania Lords of Shadow is definitely something worth checking out. Yeah, you probably thought this list was all gonna be dark and gritty games, but yeah, I had to throw something in there to keep you on your feet. A Hat in Time, what can I say about this game? Released in 2017, it is a collectathon that harkens back to the collectathons of the N64 and especially the GameCube era. In fact, I think the whole aesthetic really does look like something you'd find on the GameCube, or maybe even the Wii. You play as this kid named Hat Girl. I'm pretty sure her name is Hat Girl, but she's basically it. She's a kid with a hat. What more do you want from me? And you go around to several different open worlds and collect these hourglasses, this game's version of a Power Star, or a Jiggy, or whatever you want to call it. It's a very simple game, but if you enjoy something like Mario Sunshine or Mario Galaxy, Banjo-Kazooie, or I don't know, maybe even DK64, this is going to be a game for you. Has a very fun art style, very engaging platforming mechanics, and you've got a couple different powers that you can switch between by switching out your hat. Yeah, it's called A Hat in Time. They're gonna do some stuff with hats, alright? This game is just a whole lot of fun. It's simple, it's easy to get into, and there's a lot of colorful worlds to explore. One of my favorites has got to be the movie studio level. I feel like a lot of people like this, but there's some good reason. Moving through the different sets and filming areas, and then eventually even starring in your own movies, including one which is just a parody of Murder on the Orient Express. But then later on, you'll get to these worlds that really challenge your knowledge of the game and its mechanics. I remember one of the last worlds being several islands in the sky, really giving me a hard time because it just required some really insane platforming, massive levels that required a ton of traversal, but I just enjoyed every second of it. This is a feel-good game, pure and simple. If you want something lighthearted, if you want something easy to get into, if you want something that's just gonna make you smile, play A Hat in Time. So about a year ago, I finally broke down and bought a Nintendo Switch, because I do like Nintendo games, guys. And what I like about the Switch is the large variety of options available to you, including some classic games with the Nintendo Online subscription. And the series I wanted to get into more than anything else was Metroid. It's another one of those games I never played growing up, but always thought would be so cool and that it would be something I would enjoy. And I mean, hey, Samus ain't too bad either. So, similar to Castlevania, I've been playing through a ton of the Metroid games and have covered pretty much all of them that I have available to me. And while all of them are fantastic, from Super Metroid to Metroid Prime, gotta say my favorite has been Metroid Fusion. Released on the Game Boy Advance, Fusion was a return to the roots of this series. I've brought up the term Metroidvania a couple times in this video, and I think most people know what that is, but just in case you don't, Metroidvanias get their name from both Metroid and Castlevania. And it specifically refers to a game that takes place in a 2D world, but instead of having standard levels with beginnings and ends, it pretty much is just an open-ended adventure. The entire map is available to you at any given time as long as you have the tools to traverse it. You'll be traveling through the maze that are these worlds only to come across a door or an obstacle that you cannot cross right now. However, maybe 30 minutes to an hour down the road, you're going to find the tool that'll let you go through that door. All of a sudden, you backtrack and you have opened up a whole new area of the map. It essentially turns every item you find into a key that unlocks more of this world that you continue to explore. It's kind of like an open world, but in 2 dimensions. In Metroid Fusion, that world is a research station. After having finally eliminated the Metroid threat from the galaxy, Samus joins a scientific expedition going to explore the world of the Metroids. While there, however, they come across a far more dangerous predator known as the X-Parasite, an organism bent on consuming all life but also capable of recreating it. Think Halo's The Flood meets John Carpenter's The Thing. Once the parasite latches onto her body, Samus is rushed to an emergency surgery, where doctors administer a vaccine made from the Metroid DNA, Metroids being the natural predators of Parasite X. While it destroys Samus's suit, it provides her with a new suit of armor, which recreate the powers of her one-time enemy, the Metroids. The problem is that this X-Parasite is now loose aboard the space station and is consuming everything on board. And Samus is the only thing capable of stopping it, because she is the only thing that will not immediately die in its presence. However, Samus is not alone on this space station, as the X-Parasite that latched onto her did manage to recreate her form and take control of her power suit. A power suit specifically designed for dealing with Metroids, which, remember how I said you have Metroid DNA? So now as you make your way through the facility trying to contain the virus, you are hunted by a creature that is your equal. In fact, it is more than your equal because it is equipped with everything you are weak to. This creates a very mild but very effective horror aspect to Metroid Fusion, on top of the already grotesque body horror that is seen in the X-Parasite. Now, one criticism I know this game has gotten a lot is that it's made the Metroidvania format too streamlined and too straightforward. A lot of the appeal to a game like Super Metroid is that you were thrown onto this world and told nothing. You had to figure out where to go entirely on your own. This game does try to assist you by offering an AI companion, a computer named Adam who will at least give you a rough idea of where to go. He will tell you and show you on your map what areas of the spaceship you are going to next. However, he does not tell you how to get there. You do not come equipped with a map. You create the map as you travel through the space station, and you will run into obstacles you did not account for on your way to your target, so you'll have to come up with an alternate route. I feel like this is a good compromise because it still has the open-ended nature of the game while also giving you some sort of direction. As much as I love Super Metroid, there were times it was just too cryptic in what you were supposed to do or where you were supposed to go. A criticism that gets nullified the more you play that game, but Metroid Fusion is a much easier stepping stool for anyone first getting into this genre. This game also features a more expansive story, including dialogue, especially from Samus as she talks with her AI computer, but also has some moments of introspection and monologues as she travels to the different layers of the ship. There are also several plot twists present in this game. Again, I don't want to spoil it, but I really cannot stress enough. If you've ever wanted to try a Metroid game, or even just a Metroidvania in general, Fusion is a great route to take if it's your first time. It holds your hand just enough without sacrificing the open-ended nature that's the appeal of these games, while also offering a pretty solid story and a horrifying atmosphere that will keep you on your toes and feeling quite tense during your adventure. Okay, I swear this is the last Castlevania game on the list. And boy, it's a good one. Funnily enough, it is another Metroidvania and another Game Boy Advance game. Developed by Koji Igarashi and his team, Arya of Sorrow takes a lot of its cues from Symphony of the Night. You play as Soma Cruz, a high school transfer student who finds himself and his girlfriend in a very supernatural mystery, as the two are mysteriously teleported to an ethereal world which holds Dracula's castle. You are not alone here, however, as you come across a wide cast of characters, including some paranormal investigators, religious missionaries, and several other enigmatic folks. Soma also discovers that he has a very strange ability within this world. When defeating one of Dracula's minions, Soma discovers he's actually capable of absorbing their souls, gaining the powers of whatever creature he slayed. And this is the primary gameplay function of Arya of Sorrow. When defeating an enemy, you have a small chance to absorb that enemy's soul and gain its ability, which can be used as a weapon, a traversal tool, or some other type of bonus to help you out on your adventure. This gives you more incentive to go out and level up and defeat enemies because there's a chance that you will learn something new, get more powerful. It's a very satisfying gameplay loop. And it means each time you return to this game, your playthrough is going to be different than the one before. Since there's a percentage chance to absorb a soul, you are not going to get the same powers each time you come through. Obviously, you could grind out until you get the ones you want, but it does encourage you to explore different options as only so much is available to you each time. The castle is as eerie as it ever is, however, one key aspect is missing, that being the Lord of the Castle himself. You learn quite early on that Dracula is defeated. And not just dead in the sense that, oh, he's going to resurrect in a few years. No, he is gone for good. In fact, that makes up a majority of the mystery surrounding this game. No one is quite sure why this castle has returned, because Dracula was killed many years ago. In fact, it seems some of the people in the castle are connected with that battle that took place here, ending the Count's life. And others were born on the day the Count fell, wondering if they have now become the reincarnation of Dracula. It creates a mysterious atmosphere that keeps you guessing as you continue through this world. And it all ends up in several different reveals, including one that, and I don't say this too lightly, one reveal that I would almost put on the same level as the Knights of the Old Republic plot twist. You know the one. This has got to be one of the best Metroidvania games I have ever played. The art style is fantastic, not just in the pixels, but also in the individual character sprites. Each character model is based off of one of Ayami Kojima's drawings and concept arts for this game. And man, even in pixel form, they look beautiful. It gives the game the gothic aesthetic it needs, and it helps sell the atmosphere of the castle. This is one of those games where both the gameplay and the story combined in such a beautiful way, as clearly you are connected to the mystery as seen with your ability to absorb the soul of these monsters. But what does that mean for you? And what does that mean for the other people within Castlevania? Well, there's only one way to find out, and that is by going and playing Arya of Sorrow for yourself. Before revealing the number one game on this list, I wanted to give some of my friends an opportunity to talk about their favorite games as well. Many of y'all will probably recognize Austin and Jevon, who show up on a lot of different streams and some other videos I've made. And I asked the two of them to talk about their favorite games, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them.
Hey guys, first off, I want to give a big thanks to my friend CU Dad for letting me jump in and talk about one of my favorite games, Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice. Even though it won Game of the Year in 2019, Sekiro still feels strangely underappreciated. You don't see a big fandom around it like you do for Dark Souls or Bloodborne or Elden Ring. It's like people acknowledge it, but they don't talk about it unless they're saying how hard the game is. And I think that's a shame because Sekiro is something truly special. The game is set in a fictional version of the Warring States era of Japan, in a land called Ashina. You play as a shinobi called Sekiro, also called Wolf, sworn to protect a young lord named Kuro, who holds the power of immortality. When Kuro is taken, you set off on a journey of rescue, loyalty, and reckoning. What makes Sekiro immediately stand out, even before you pick up the sword, is how different it is from the regular FromSoft titles. The story structure is very straightforward and normal as opposed to the vague worlds they're known for. Sekiro, unlike other From Software titles where you play as a nameless wanderer, is a fully written character. He has a voice, a backstory, and a real emotional connection to the people and the world. It adds weight to the story and gives the game a more focused, emotional core. Gameplay-wise, Sekiro is again a major shift from the usual From Software formula. You can jump, climb walls, sneak through grass, and zip around with a grappling hook. With a dedicated stealth system and an aspect of verticality to the world, It's reminiscent of the Batman Arkham games, but with the tight challenge you'd expect from a Souls game. But the real star is the combat. Instead of whittling down health bars, you're focused on breaking posture, yours and your enemies. It becomes a fast, tense rhythm game of perfectly timed attacks and deflections. Hesitate once, and it's all over. It's not about builds or gear. You've got one sword, some prosthetic tools, and your own skill. That's it. There's no cheesing your way through, no overpowered armor or weapons, just you learning, adapting, and getting better. It's brutal, but it's also one of the most fair and rewarding systems I've ever played. The game doesn't just challenge your reflexes, it teaches you persistence, timing, and trust in yourself. In the end, Sekiro is more than just a hard game. It's an experience that demands your focus and rewards your efforts with unforgettable moments. If you're looking for a gripping story, a true challenge, and some of the most satisfying combat ever designed, I can't recommend Sekiro enough.
So, one of my favorite horror games, a game called Detention. This game was brought to my attention during the time I was in college. And I remember looking at a horror game iceberg video. You guys know what the ones I'm talking about. While I'm not some horror media connoisseur, I do know my way around the indie horror title scene. And Detention was one of the ones that really stood out to me, not just because of its unsettling atmosphere, but due to its lore and its deeply disturbing story. You play as a Taiwanese schoolgirl named Fang Wei Xin. You know, she's an Asian schoolgirl in a disturbing cultural and societal oppressed country. What could go wrong, right? In summary though, she's trapped within her own version of purgatory where those same cultural and societal pressures overwhelm her. She is legitimately on survival mode right now, and it sucks. The farther she goes in though, the larger the hole she digs herself in. And fun fact, this game actually inspired me to create a short film while I was in college. Another fun fact, CIU Dad was one of my main characters in the film. So the film's called Suspended, you know, promoting film and everything. But overall, I digress. Unfortunately, unlike my film, Ray gets no happy ending. The game perfectly encapsulates the choice of sin, finding happiness, and trying to escape an inescapable judgment. I'm not gonna lie, this one really resonated with me on a personal, spiritual, and mental level, because now, not only giving me a perspective on horror, like no other horror titles have done other than one exception, that being Silent Hill. But this one spoke to me on such a deeply rooted area of my life, about just childhood trauma, etc., and you know, it shows to me, you know, sometimes horror, much like life, isn't always black and white, especially with me being a Christian follower. And I feel like more Christians should get into stories like these because, you know, it does need to be talked about in certain instances. But I digress again. The game itself is amazing if you really like side scrollers and puzzles. Just be prepared to go down this iceberg because it's a big one.
Thank you guys so much again for your input and for, as always, just collaborating with the channel from time to time. Also, just so y'all know, today is also Austin's birthday, so, wish him a happy birthday too. All right, but now it's time for the number one entry.
Name?
My name is Fox. Jesse Fox.
You don't seem to be Russian.
Russian? Me?
You were piloting a Russian aircraft 2 hours ago.
I also drive a Toyota, and I'm not Japanese.
Oh boy, I have been waiting to talk about this game. So yeah, like I said, big fan of the Metal Gear series. But not just Metal Gear Solid. In fact, one of my favorite games is the original Metal Gear on the MSX. Despite being an 8-bit game, it plays almost identically to the original Metal Gear Solid. But there's not really a whole lot of games like it, this kind of 2D stealth game. But lo and behold, one day I was scrolling on the Xbox store and I came across this monstrosity, Unmetal. It was pretty apparent from the beginning what this is. This is clearly a parody of the Metal Gear franchise. This is the Spaceballs to MGS's Star Wars. But like any good parody, not only does it poke fun at the source material, it also manages to recreate what made that original series so good. Unmetal plays exactly like the old school Metal Gear games, just with a lot more modern mechanics added on top of them, many of which blend in surprisingly well. You play as Jesse Fox, the obvious stand-in for Solid Snake, as you sneak through this enemy base and defeat the evil plans of whatever these villains are doing. It's got good 2D art style, it's got that classic Metal Gear game formula, and it's also got some pretty solid humor. I'll be honest, like, the in-game story itself is not necessarily the most fascinating thing in the world. You know, it's a pretty typical action movie fare. But the way the story is presented is what is so hilarious to me. Because, mild spoilers for the game, very mild spoilers, this is something you find out pretty early on. But at first the game is set up as being a retelling of Jesse's last mission, as he is communicating it to a military base that picked him up and is holding him for questioning. So at first you think it's just him recounting the mission. But then you find out later on that no, this is not something that's actually happening. This whole game is actually a story that the real Jesse Fox is telling his girlfriend as they are on a road trip together. It is a story within a story within a story. And the interactions between these two just feel so genuine, like it's the type of thing some dumb boyfriend would come up with just to try and be entertaining and funny. And she's naturally poking holes in it and making fun of it, but still having a good time listening to it anyways. It also leads to some other mild humor whenever you eventually come across the sexy nurse. Look, the game doesn't take itself too seriously, and yet it still manages to deliver a really solid product. On the gameplay front, in addition to the standard stealth fare, another major mechanic is crafting. You'll take different elements and objects you find in the world and mix them together to solve whatever puzzle you come across. If you need to create a makeshift time bomb, if you need a certain chemical formula. Heck, the very first thing you do in this game, one of my favorite elements, you find an eye patch, and of course you want to put the eye patch on, but when you wear the eye patch it covers up half of your screen because that's how eye patches work, you've got two working eyes. But what you're actually supposed to do is combine it with some sticks to create a makeshift slingshot so you can fight enemies. This is your first weapon in the game. Unmetal is an absolute riot. It's a great spoof on a series that honestly needs to be made fun of every once in a while, while still respecting the source material enough to meticulously recreate the core gameplay loop that makes Metal Gear so fun. All with the comedic edge that makes it perfect for someone like me. Is it the best game on this list today? Probably not. I'll be honest, I realized I didn't say this until just now, but yeah, this whole list wasn't really in a specific order. Like, you could mix and match these however you want. I tried kind of making it the least interesting to the most interesting, but other than that, there wasn't a hard criteria. But I do have to say this game is the best as far as just being a fun game. You're gonna remember it, you're gonna have fun with it, and I mean, at the end of the day, that's what a video game is for. And it's pretty cheap to pick up too. So, if this sounds like something you're interested in, go ahead and join Jesse Fox in Unmetal. And that is gonna do it for our list today. What do you think of these top 10 games? Have you played any of these? Have you wanted to play any of them? Is there anything that you had never heard of before and now you really have an urge to go out and play? Let me know in the comments below. What's your favorite games of all time? Leave a list down below with your top 10. Maybe talk a little bit about why you love each one. And of course, thank you again for watching this far. I'm sure this is going to end up being a super long video, so thank you for going through it. I want to shout out Austin and Jevon once again for giving their input. It was really nice giving them a chance to talk about some of their favorite games as well. And of course, if you're interested in watching the other anniversary videos I've made, including my previous 2 top 10s, and another modded out Skyrim video harkening back to the first on this channel, then I'll go ahead and link them in the description below as well. But that is going to do it for today. If you don't mind, I kind of want to take a break and actually play some of these games instead of talking about them. So I will see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.